welcome you all to this breakfast meeting, 2024 Economic Outlook. And we are so excited that you're able to join us. And if you're as excited as we are, I want to say welcome to every one of us. And this event is going to be so impactful, and I'm positive that every one of us will be living here with something tangible to work with in our respective organization. If you are just joining us, coming across the Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria for the first time, we want to say welcome. This is Society for Corporate Governance, and our interest is to be at the forefront of advocating for best practices and for sustainability in various organizations. And this is one of our ways of advocating for such economic outlook, where we dissect the trend in economic outlook that is affecting economy globally and localize it to our own Nigerian economy. Now we have a lineup of speakers that are well vast and grounded in the subject matter. And I want to say welcome. A few housekeeping before we dive into the session of the day, which just a minute, please. Allow me to share my screen. And I'll just take it from there. So I've done a bit of what we do at Society for Corporate Governance. And at the end of the session, I will take us through our services and what we do once again. But right now, I just want to take us through the agenda of the day. For a quick one, I want to apologize to everyone on behalf of an emergency happened. Of course, every one of us must have seen a flyer up to this morning that the flyers we are putting out contains 2 speakers. And unforeseen circumstances happened, and Mr. Balogun Bolaji will not be available because he's very, very sorry, saying his apologies with regard to everyone who will be part of this meeting. And he did not take it for granted, his opportunity to be with every one of us, but duty calls and it's unavoidable that he has to be absent. And he sent his apology. But you can trust me that we are in a good hand. By the time we start the session, you will agree with me that we are in a good hand for the whole session. We plan not to go beyond the scheduled time, which is between the hour of 10 a.m. to 12 noon. And this is the agenda. The first session will be the opening remarks, which I'm currently doing. Apologies, I think I did not introduce myself. My name is Olale Olumide Mayowa. I work with Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. And I'm currently doing the welcome or opening remarks. So after that, we'll be having the presentation, which is going to be taken by Mr. Obichukwu, the founder and CEO of Nairametrics Financial Advocates. And after his presentation, we'll have opportunity to have question and answer session. So I want to say, while the session is going on, I want us to take note of the questions, contributions we have. At the end of the session, we have opportunity to either unmute our mic or we'll send the questions through the chat box. But I want to say, if you wish to speak, to ask a question or to make the contribution, the modality will be that you raise your hand, the speaker or myself will acknowledge, then we allow you to speak, you ask your question so that we can have a decorum. So I'm hopeful and I'm positive that this discussion will be robust and we'll all go leave this discussion, this meeting, something tangible. Once again, I want to say welcome. Without wasting much time, I want to quickly read the abridged profile of the speaker for the day. And please, if I say abridged profile, you agree that his profile is heavier than what I'll be reading. But because if I start to read his profile, we may not leave there today. So just with their business profile. So Mr. Ugodre is the founder and partner at Nairametrics Financial Advocates. He boasts of over 18 years of diverse expertise in accounting, corporate finance, business development. As a chartered accountant and fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing, he is also recognized for his role as a personal finance advocate, financial analyst, and blogger, with a strong focus on financial literacy and insight into the Nigerian stock market. Ugodre's influence extends across various media platforms, from radio and broadcast to social media and YouTube, earning him a prominent position in a personal finance advocacy in Nigeria. In 2023, he was honored as the EY West African Entrepreneur of the Year. Beyond his professional achievements, Ugodre values family time, indulges in reading, and enjoys music paired with a bottle of premium whiskey. His expertise is sought after by founders and successful startups, boards, and management in financial institutions and multinationals, where he frequently delivers presentations and commentaries. Ugodre's popular investment shows, such as Everyday Money Matters and Business Hours on Lagos Talks 91.3 FM, further solidify his standing in financial community. Without much ado, I will want you to engage his standing ovation and clapping ovation in welcoming our speaker for the day, Mr. Ugodre Obichukwu. So, sir, you have the floor. You're welcome. If you can unmute where you are, you can help me to welcome Mr. Ugodre. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
You're most welcome, sir. We're happy to have you.
You're most welcome, sir. Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much to the Society of Corporate Governance for the honor to present to you today on the economic outlook for Nigeria. I know that it's February and we're 6 weeks or so into the country, but into the year. But there's still a lot that we haven't even started doing yet this year. So I think it's still befitting that the time is apt for me to take you through the macroeconomic outlook for 2024. Let me also do not forget to congratulate everyone for yesterday's amazing game. Just shows the resilience of Nigerians and how we can always achieve if we're very serious as a collective. There's so many things that we can do in this country if we're really serious and we'll set our minds to it. So congratulations, everyone. Even though we haven't won the cup yet, I'm hoping that by Sunday we will win the Nations Cup. So I hope I have permissions to share my screen.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, okay. Let me try and do that now. Okay, let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, I can see your screen.
All right, so I will try to stop my video so that you can focus on the presentation. I have a very rich presentation today that I'll be sharing, so please take out your pen and paper. If there are things that you need to note or ask me later, please go ahead and feel free to ask me. All right, so this is Nigeria's economic outlook, macroeconomic outlook for 2024, and I will be presenting it to all of you. Interesting that this is my first presentation on in the webinar, so you guys are the first to see these in the webinar. I've always done this presentation in-house for a lot of organizations, but you're the first to see this publicly in a webinar. All right, so as I like to start my presentations, I'll start with geopolitical events, global and region. We're in a a small world now. The world is global, so a lot of things that happen outside of Nigeria tend to always affect us in Nigeria, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in the US or whether it's in Asia or South America or even within sub-Saharan Africa here. They tend to have an effect on what we do or how we do our business in Nigeria. So I will take you through geopolitical events, of course, globally and regional in the last year, my expectation for the year. So last year was the second year of the Russia-Ukraine war. That war still maintains till today. Fighting has escalated. We've seen a bit of apprehension from the West. The European Parliament just basically approved a few billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. The US has also approved similar, but this didn't come without a fight. There was intense battle in the Parliament of at the European Parliament and even at the US House as they debated how much more they can keep funding this war. This is as much as this is a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's also a war between the West and of course Russia. So while not directly involved, the West is obviously backing Ukraine to win this war because the expectation is that, or the belief is that if Russia does win this war, it could have severe implications for the West. And so that is why you're seeing a lot of funding behind Ukraine. Ukraine, on the other hand, has its own issues. I think there's issues of corruption on how some of the funds that have been sent out has been used by that country. There's also fear of war fatigue in the country as well. Meanwhile, on the other side, Russia also has internal problems. As you can see, this man here, Prigozhin, who was very prosecuting this war on behalf of Putin, also fell out with Putin at some point, and the war also cost him his life because he died, according to the information that they gave us, in a plane crash. And then you come to the top right here, where you have China and US also locked in a battle for the soul of who leads the global economy, particularly in terms of tech. So the Americans see the Chinese as a major threat to their global economic power. And as a result, have been on a long-drawn battle with China to slow China's economic growth and might and influence globally. A lot of this war is concentrated around technology because I think the US believes that technology is likely going to be whoever owns or whoever leads technologically will probably be the major driver for the global economy. And what is interesting is that it's not just technology, even renewables and sustainability, the world also sees as one of those areas where that might determine who leads the world economically. And so China and Russia are in loggerheads with this new version of Cold War. And then you move down to the left, of course, you have Israeli-Hamas war, which still rages on. There was a proposal for a truce that was sent by that was agreed between Hamas and Middle East mediating countries. But the Jews, the Israelis rejected it because they believe that this is a war that they can win. And so they want to win this war. Of course, we all know that when you say that's a truce, that obviously means that the war would end and then Hamas would remain. And I think Israel sees that as some sign of victory for Hamas because they can essentially come back and then cause harm. But what does this all mean? I mean, this all has different implications for regional global peace. If the Russia-Ukraine war continues to rage on, that would have an effect on commodity prices. If the US-China silent war, Cold War continues, that will have an effect on on global raw materials, especially raw materials that is critical to how technology, new technology such as AI develops globally, there's also a scramble for raw materials, especially in Africa, or minerals in Africa. So that is very key. And of course, Israeli-Hamas war also has impact on global oil prices, and we all know what that means for us here in Nigeria. So that's what's going on the global side. And then I move straight to key global economic indicators and the forecast that most, particularly the World Bank has globally. Some of this forecast has been slightly revised of late, but not that much departure from what we have here. Globally, the global economy is expected to grow at a real GDP of 2.9%. The US is meant to grow at 1.5%, Euro area 1.2%, and of course, Sub-Saharan Africa 4.0%. I think this was revised downwards to 3.9%, if I'm not mistaken. And then you also have the Middle East at 3.4%, and then emerging and developing Asia at 4.8%. So as you can all see, global growth regionally is essentially under 6%, but on average, we're looking at just around 2.9% globally. So this is a bit of a deceleration from the 3% that we had in 2023 and 3.5% that we had in 2022. Usually when global economic growth rate is this low, it means that a lot of businesses might struggle globally this year. It doesn't mean that you won't have businesses that will succeed, but in a nutshell, you're going to have businesses that might struggle in 2024 as the world grapples with everything that I mentioned in this slide. So that is global economic growth. Please let me know if you can still, if my slide is still there, if you can still see it.
Very
Yes,
well.
we can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, fantastic. Okay, so we move on to the next slide. This is a very interesting bit of presentation, so I think everyone should focus. It's going to take a while, probably another 40 minutes or so. Hopefully, I'll be done. What's the time now? 10:17. Okay, so our dear own Africa. For a lot of people, this is how sub-Saharan African countries are kind of grouped. As you can see, you have oil exporters here: Angola, Cameroon, Chad, Congo DR, Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Nigeria, and Sudan. These are officially oil exporting countries. That's why they always talk about oil curse. As you can see, most of these countries, as much as they are oil rich, they are also struggling economically. And then you now have resource intensive countries. These are countries that are blessed with natural resources in Africa. And as you can see, you have Botswana, Burkina Faso, and one of the most blessed countries in Africa, in fact, in the world, Congo DRC. I'm surprised Nigeria is not here. This data is from the IMF. I think Nigeria is also a resource-intensive country. It's just that we're probably not exploring those resources as much as we can. And then in non-resource-intensive countries, countries that don't necessarily have natural resources, doesn't mean that they don't have, but they don't just have enough, or enough for them to call resource-intensive. And of course, you now have countries that are divided into middle-income countries, low-income countries, and then countries that have conflicts. As you can see, what's interesting is that Nigeria is included as one of those countries that has its own conflict. And of course, as a middle-income country in Africa, Nigeria is also there. And then you have low-income countries, a lot of African countries belonging in that bucket. So this is, essentially how sub-Saharan African countries are spread today. Now, what does this mean? Just shows you where the global fight is likely going to be concentrated over the next few years, because global superpower countries that have control over the resource of the countries in this bucket here are likely to be the countries that will garner a lot of attention. And as you can see, there's a lot of discussions with countries here on how to maybe restructure their debt and provide some kind of funding for their economy to continue to grow. And so this will dominate a lot of global diplomacy in the years to come. Now, we'll focus a bit more on sub-Saharan African countries. Sub-Saharan African countries, which of course Nigeria belongs to, do have their own challenges. Challenges that we're all facing. I'm sure we're all familiar with what Nigeria is facing in terms of inflation. Other countries are also facing inflation. Ghana is facing inflation. Kenya is facing inflation. South Africa as well. Senegal, we're all facing inflation, though at varying rates. Interest rate is also high globally, so that is also impacting interest rate in Africa. And then we also have slow economic growth in Africa as well, which I had mentioned earlier. Large fiscal deficit is also what we struggle with in sub-Saharan African countries. A large fiscal deficit is basically when government spends more than it has, more than it makes. Anytime a government spends more than it makes, it will continue to have large fiscal deficits. And Nigeria is one of such countries that currently suffers a large fiscal deficit. In fact, we've been running fiscal deficits for over a decade. And then we'll move to 2024. Growth outlook, I think I mentioned already that we're looking at 4% for sub-Saharan African countries. It is expected that for 1/5 of sub-Saharan African countries, especially the non-resource intensive ones, will likely grow. That's the irony of Africa. Countries that are non-resource intensive appear to experience growth more than the countries that are resource intensive. It just shows that natural resources, as well, as much as it's very good, can also be a curse if you don't know how to harness it. So in terms of macroeconomic improvements, expectation is decreasing inflation in African countries. However, this is basically based on what we call base effects. And then we also expect that public finances will be stabilized as the IMF and most global financial institutions continue to pump money into African countries through FDIs. What are the potential risks? Lack of reforms. If the reforms that African countries are putting together don't work, that might be a risk. There's also a risk of political instability. I think we've seen what has happened in Senegal. Senegal was meant to have an election this month, but for some reason, the current president, whose term was meant to expire, has now gotten his own National Assembly approval to extend his tenure. Senegal, by the way, is the only African country, or at least one of the few West African countries that has never had a coup since independence. And so everybody's a little bit jittery about what is going on there. And that's what I mean by political instability. Of course, there are other risks such as food and water and natural disasters. So what are the challenges ahead for sub-Saharan African countries? Persistent inflation is a challenge, even though we do expect it to decelerate a bit. But double-digit inflation is still high. I'm sure you all heard the central bank governor say, that's the Nigerian central bank governor say that he's expecting inflation to be at around 21%. Exchange rate remains a challenge for African countries. And of course, we do have debt vulnerabilities because most African countries are highly indebted and then economies divergent, widening wage gap. The gap between the poor and the rich continues to be wide, and this is a huge problem. We've seen protests across African countries, even in Nigeria. For the first time, we saw protests start from the northern part of the country, and that hardly happens, but we've seen that happen already this year. And so let's speak a bit more about the geopolitical scramble for Africa, which I spoke to earlier. Like I mentioned, Africa is unique because of the natural resources that it has. And so because Africa has a lot of natural resources and minerals, these minerals is what is going to be used to develop or to draw in the world that we're getting into. We all have heard about AI and the power of AI and what AI can mean for the global economy. What has happened is that you've seen Western powers position themselves to take advantage of the resources that we have in Africa. China actually started this, and China started with their Belt and Road Initiative. So that BRI initiative, we started over a decade ago, was essentially China providing finance for African countries to develop their infrastructure. And that, of course, meant a lot of those African countries owed or had Chinese debt on their balance sheet. Nigeria, for example, has about $4 billion or so in Chinese debt on its debt profile. In exchange, a lot of Chinese companies were involved in the development of their infrastructure. If you look at the new MMIA airport wing, the new terminal, that terminal was built by Chinese money. And that is what China replicates across Africa. And through initiatives like this, they believe that they can hold significant influence in how Africa's mineral resources is essentially used. Now, the US came rather late to the table, and so their own focus is what we tend to call soft diplomacy or soft economic diplomacy. So rather than maybe focus on infrastructure, the US is using things like sustainability, climate change, and renewables as their own way of also cornering Africa's mineral resources. So in a nutshell, what they do is they would bring a lot of technological support to African countries, provide a lot of services, which the West is very good at, to African countries. And then in exchange, they can also now also, of course, corner the mineral resources of Africa. The US believes that is how, that is their own strategy. And a few years ago, the Biden administration passed its Inflation Reduction Act. And that Inflation Reduction Act essentially provides a very clear framework for how the US is also looking at its own future. And what is interesting about that act is, as much as it's called Inflation Reduction Act, it really isn't about inflation. It's really about how the US can also attract foreign investment. Can you imagine the US is also looking to attract foreign investment and also stimulate local manufacturing production? So rather than have US companies go and manufacture in China or in other countries, the US is also looking to centralize manufacturing in its own country. So that is what they're trying to do. And if they're going to go all out, they are going to need a lot of mineral resources from African countries. And so their own initiative essentially is to use soft diplomacy to drive investment in African countries. And of course, we also have Russia's influence in Africa. Russia's own style rather is not economic power. Russia is mostly focused on its security. Russia, as we all know, is very influential globally when it comes to security. And so what they are trying to do is corner a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, especially the ones in the Sahel, through security by providing security to mostly military regimes. And so once they can support pariah military regimes or military regimes that are considered pariah to African countries or to maybe regional African groups like African Union or ECOWAS and the West, then those leaders would always dance to the tune of Russia. And so they provide those guys some kind of protection. And again, in exchange, this is all about minerals. So that is how Africa is shaping, and it's pretty interesting following how this is all panning out. What is also quite instructive to note is a lot of African leaders are not as docile as they used to be. So they are also not just accepting a lot of all this support from the West and giving up influence for free. So that's why most African countries are non-aligned and not necessarily aligned with anyone. They just go with the flow, essentially, whoever it is that supports them. But Nigeria looks like Nigeria is in a way standing with the West here silently. But at the same time, Nigeria does a lot of business with China and even the Middle East as well. So that is how the geopolitical scramble for Africa is essentially shaping up. Now we move into 2023. What have we learned? One thing that I like to do is to know how Africa has performed over the years. You also look at go to social media, and it gives you an idea of how Nigeria has performed, rather what we've learned in 2023 in Nigeria. So in 2023, of course, it started with the Naira note disaster. And then we had that festive 2023 election. And then we now face galloping inflation in Nigeria. Food prices, everything is essentially off the charts. And then the central bank governor was removed in June, midway into his second term as a central bank governor. And then we do now had Naira unification, where the exchange rate was unified, and the expectation was that that was going to usher in a stabilization of the Naira, which of course we haven't really seen. And then we had a new National Assembly, and then electorates more than ever are polarized, because I know that in the streets of social media, on the streets of Nigeria, we tend to have what we call Agbadorians and obedients. I don't know who are the obedients and Agbadorians in these charts. If you're an obedient or an Agbadoria, please, you can indicate clearly. But we know that that's basically how the electorates are polarized. While politicians are, sort of put themselves in the pocket of political parties, whether it's APC or PDP, I think Nigerians are more around terminologies, more around followings, not necessarily a political party. Because we know from experience that these guys do jump from one party to the other. So I think there's somebody interfering. Is there somebody interfering? Someone want to say something? I think it's phone shot. Is phone shot saying anything?
They're just going to mute him. We'll mute him.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so what are the buzzwords that characterize 2023? Please, if there's anyone that I've missed, include it in the chat. These are the words that I heard in 2023, and these are how a lot of Nigerians tend to react to the economic situation or things that are affecting them. Let the poor breathe. I'm sure you guys know where that came from. Sakba, in case you've never heard it before, speaks to people that are going through hard times. There's so many of them here. There's trenches. People that are in the trenches are people that are maybe ghetto-like. And then, of course, we have the Jackpot syndrome. Everybody knows what that means. Like, even the foreigners know what Jackpot means. So that is also one of those buzzwords that we saw last year. A very interesting one, premium shade. In fact, I'm even hearing there's one called Shade Pro Max, which of course, according to young Nigerians, is the sort of suffering, economic suffering that people are going through. So I don't know which one I've missed. If I've missed anyone, do please put it in the chats and explain what it means as you put it in the chat so that we can all learn. But this essentially is how Nigerians go through economic challenges every day. And as much as these things can provide some kind of humor, it's also quite clear how we perceive the situation today. Right. So what has 2023 taught us? What has it taught? What have you learned? Every year you got to learn something. And for me, these are my own 5 or 9 main things. So first is no condition is permanent. None. You can be a governor today and tomorrow you're no longer a governor. So of course you can ask former office holders what that meant. And then be careful what you wish for. When you say come and fight me, you know what it means. Because the tools that you had when you said come and fight me might not be available when the fight comes to you. So that's also something that we learned and we have to be very careful about. And of course, honeymoons never last long, right? So when the current president came in, he came up with a rash of very good economic policies, and we all know how that went, because as much as people liked it, I was one of those who liked it in the beginning, but it hasn't really delivered the immediate succor that people were looking for. Rather, we're now in an era of, in quotes, premium sugar. So honeymoons don't last long at all. And of course, politicians, what they do most is they promise heaven, but a lot of times deliver hell. So it's very important that we are aware of that. And then people in politics tend to always blame the people that were there before. It's just that how long are you going to keep blaming them, right? Because, that's what they do. So they tend to always blame their predecessor, even if they are in the same political party or in the same political clan or group. But that is politics for Nigeria. And more importantly, from an economic standpoint, like I tweeted a few days ago, spend now, save tomorrow. If you want to fight inflation, spend now, save tomorrow. People tend to say save now and spend so that you can spend tomorrow. No, not in Nigeria. Because if you save, that money will be eaten away by inflation. And we've seen that. So if you have money now and there's something that is important for you to spend and you have that money, you better just do it now, because you don't know what or how things might pan out going down the line. And of course, $1 in hand beats 1,000 nairas. That is clear, isn't it? Yes, because If you have $1, a year ago, $1 was an equivalent of about 700 naira. Today, $1 is an equivalent of 1,500 naira. So $1 in hand beats 1,000 naira. So you want to have to keep that your dollar in hand. I'm sure you know what that message is. And of course, statistics is really like a bikini, according to a professor. That professor said that statistics is like a bikini. What it conceals is far more intriguing than what it reveals. So essentially, is be very careful of the kind of data that you're seeing. So read in between the lines. When you see data from the government or from anyone, try as much as possible to read that data very well and interpret it, because what is underlining or underpinning that data is a lot more intriguing than what the data just reveals by looking at it simply. So that is what I've learned in 2023. I'm interested to see what you've also learned. If there's anything that you learned in 2023, please put it on the chat box. I will read them as well, so that we can all share ideas. And then we'll move on. I really like this. So this image here was something that a friend of mine, my partner actually, saw in his father's archives just a few weeks ago. He was digging through his father's archive and saw this obituary that was published in 1981 or so. Look at it, very interesting. It says, "We announce with deepest regret the untimely demise of the Nigerian shoe industry after a short and hopeful life. Born during the 1960 and 1970, strangled in 1981 by heartless smugglers, right? See who they are blaming for what happened to the shoe industry in 1981. That industry was survived by 20,000 jobless workers, a bereaved government, a nation whose income is grossly reduced, murderous and unsympathetic traders." Like, you kind of see that a lot of the things that we're experiencing like now maybe happened like years ago. So as well. So this is very interesting. It was they actually put it in the papers, and look at just underneath here. It was called a prediction. A prediction. And so has that prediction come to pass? I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me that a lot of you probably agree in the affirmative that has come to pass. So I don't know what you guys think about this obituary, but I found it quite interesting, because a lot of what happens today, a lot of these things have happened. We've seen several years ago, and we've been complaining about that. Everybody thinks Nigeria will be better next year, next 2 years, but it tends to always repeat itself. So this was an image cut out from a newspaper that we found out a few weeks ago. So we dive right into the key economic indicators for Nigeria. At Nairametrics, we'd like to interpret our economic indicators from the point of view of headwinds and tailwinds. So where you see headwinds is usually challenges that we foresee, and then tailwinds is usually propellers, things that might maybe swing in the economics in the favor of the economy. Because in life, you just can't predict pessimism all the time. There's usually a silver lining around the way, so we tend to do that. But let's start with, how did we even get to this crisis that we find ourselves in Nigeria? As you can see, everything started around 2015, in fact, late 2014, when the oil price crash happened. Immediately that happened, the Naira went from 165 that it had been for like 3 years to 187. And then the central bank held it at that rate artificially, even though it was trading at the black market for over, even got to about 500 Naira at that time, while the central bank held it at this rate. And of course, they now introduced capital controls in 2016 so that you can't actually move money out of the country. Around that period as well was when you had the vote for Brexit. And then if you all remember, Niger Delta militants were bombing a lot of installations, and that led to the beginning of the crash in Nigeria's crude oil output. In fact, I think that this particular event is one of the reasons why today we see crude oil theft on the rise, because when these militants were bombing, that opened the eyes of a lot of people to the opportunities for crude oil theft. I'm not saying that it wasn't happening before then, but it sort of spiraled from here. And then in 2017, after we got into a recession, we started growing back, and then the central bank started working on forex, a rash of forex policies to stabilize the exchange rate. And then we also had the cryptocurrency boom of 2017. And then by 2018, all part of trying to control Nigeria's demand for forex, the central bank now introduced border closure, and then insecurity also increased. There were a lot of kidnappings in 2018. And then amidst all this, we were still able to eke out economic growth as we dug ourselves out of recession. Border closure continued in 2019. And then VAT was also increased from 5% to 7.5%, which it still is today. And then the CBN also stopped the OMO bills that it was issuing at that time, so that because it couldn't afford it anymore. OMO bills for interest rate was as high as 19%, and it was doing this in exchange for dollars. And in 2020, COVID-19 struck, just as it looked like the economy was coming back, and then COVID-19 struck, and we went back again into inflationary environment, and exchange rate crisis came back, and then that essentially blew up the jackpot wave, and then exchange rate crisis worsened, and then the government now focused a lot more on borrowing from the central bank to fund the government. And then in 2023, elections occurred, and then we also have the Naira swap crisis, where the central bank was trying to introduce new Naira notes and ban the old ones. And then we now had the new government coming with exchange rate unification, inflation turned to galloping. And then currently, what are we going to see? Are we going to see tapering of inflation? Are we going to see exchange rate stability? Are taxes going to be higher? Are we going to see expansionary government spending? We're already seeing this. Or are we going to have economic recovery? So this essentially is the journey of Nigeria's economic crisis. It's been going on for over 8 years now. And we put them in like 3 phases, which I'm sure you can all identify with. If there's anything I've missed, do let me know. But this is Nairametrics' own assessment of Nigeria's economic crisis over the last 8 to 10 years. So what are the challenges facing Nigerian economy? According to the central bank governor, Yemi Cardoso, he captured it as high and rising inflation. He also says there's inadequate foreign exchange supply. He also said the depreciation of the Naira is a challenge. And then limited external reserves. Our external reserves has been at $33 billion. So we also have weakened output and high unemployment rate. So that is what the current CBN governor captures as the key macroeconomic challenges facing Nigeria. At Nairametrics, we also have what we think are the challenges similar to what he put out, but we kind of put ours in 3 main buckets, because these are the buckets of Nigeria's economic challenges. The first one is high inflationary environment. That, of course, is due to higher energy prices. So the higher the crude oil price, even though it's meant to be an advantage for us in Nigeria, the higher fuel prices and diesel prices. And so that often leads to inflation. Diesel prices 2-3 years ago was about less than 200 naira. Today, diesel price is now 1.2 and 1,200 naira per liter. And that adds to inflation. Of course, we know what currency depreciation means. And then we have high money supply and an insecurity and logistics challenges. So this is a potpourri of factors that increase Nigeria's inflation rate. So inflation is one of the major problems we are facing in the country. And the second one I mentioned earlier was fiscal crisis. We have a largely ineffective budget. In fact, we continue to have largely ineffective budget. What I mean by ineffective budget is that a lot of the budgets that we have or that the government is putting together doesn't necessarily lead to sort of the kind of economic growth that we're expecting. Yes, the government builds roads, the government builds bridges, they build hospitals, but does that really generate the sort of economic growth or economic output that we need in the country? I don't think so in the last few years, because if it does, we would have seen it in the numbers, or if it did, we would have seen it in the numbers. And so by running large budgets that are not effective, that leads to fiscal deficit because you're spending more than you have. And when you spend more than you have, it means that you're borrowing, and so public debt increases. And so Nigeria also faces a fiscal crisis. In fact, I think this one is the reason why I don't see inflation. I don't see the exchange rate stabilizing in the near term. And then we also have weak economic growth. Whenever you have increase in money supply, high, and you don't have increase in economic growth, that tends to give you a high inflation. And so these are the potpourri of three main challenges that we see that Nigeria faces, based on Nairametrics assessment. And so we're going to go through each one of them in more detail, and of course, give you what we see as our headwinds and tailwinds. So we start with this. Who knows this drink? Who takes this drink? Anybody takes this drink? You can unmute your mic if you take this drink, and if you have taken this drink before, I'd like you to tell me how much it was when you started taking it and how much you think it is today. Anyone?
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please, Diane, go ahead.
Okay, the first time I bought this drink, I bought it at 150 naira. I bought it a
Ooh.
couple of days ago at 1,300.
Exactly. Fantastic, Diane. Thanks for that, because it's just crazy. Imagine 150. Actually, there was one of the presentation I had where I put this up. Somebody said they bought the drink at about 85 naira or so. And guys, this is actually a made in Nigeria drink. So Diane is saying first time she bought it 150, now is 1,002. And this is just in a span of 5 years, because the first time I bought this drink was probably 250 naira or so. And this is made in Nigeria drink, proudly made in Nigeria, but you can see how expensive it is. It's even costlier than Coke, than soft drink, costlier than beer even. This is just to show you how inflation can be, or how much inflation can affect prices of goods and services. This is another one, another inflation test. Plantain, a bunch of plantain used to be 250 maybe 3 years ago. Today, I'm sure a lot of people in the house know this. You can't get a bunch of plantain for less than 1.5. And even when you get that bunch of plantain for 1.5, it's way smaller than it was when it was going for 250 or 500 naira. People now even sell yam in bits. So a lot of people can't even afford to buy a whole tuber of yam. You have to basically cut the yam as it is like this and sell it. It's just crazy how things are panning out in Nigeria. And this is what inflation usually causes. And that's why inflation is something you don't want to wish on your enemy, because when it happens in any country, it is very, very difficult to fight. And inflation leads to a lot of bad things. It leads to poverty. It causes fake products. It even leads to kidnapping, insecurity issues. A lot of these things find its roots to inflation. So we move on to what inflation has meant for food prices. As you can see, plantain or ripe plantain is 82% up just in 1 year. Ripe plantain 75% up in 1 year. What else? Rice, imported rice of high quality is up 47%. Beans up 40%. I mean, like every single thing. Evaporated tin milk is up 63%. I think just last week, Indomie noodles also announced another increase in their prices. So you're going to see a lot of these increases happening from time to time as the exchange rate continues to worsen. So this has been the impact of inflation on food prices. What about DSTV prices? This is also something that a lot of people use in their homes, even though for what I gather, people have just dumped it, prefer to just focus on Netflix or however way they consume their content on TV. In fact, children these days don't even watch TV. Everything is on their mobile phone now. But for those of us who still watch these things, look at the price increase from 2020, right? You've seen the premium package from 2020 go from just 18,000 or 17,000 to what now? Almost 30,000 for a premium package, double the price. Even the compact plus package, the same thing. So these things all have direct ripple effects on how the economy is perceived. because this is what Nigeria spend money on today. There's hardly any home who doesn't spend on things like this. So what has inflation been in the last year? As you can see from this chart, is someone about to talk? Okay. All right. So what has inflation been? As you can see, inflation from December 2022 at 21.3%. At this time, we thought that we're like, this was one of the worst. But today, inflation is about 28.9 or so percent today. So inflation is pretty high at 28.9, and even food inflation is at 3.9%. A lot of people will tell you that they don't even believe some of these inflation numbers because they believe that it's probably even way higher than what it is today. But these are official numbers. And inflation has essentially been driven by a lot of supply side factors. Inflation sometimes is driven by supply and demand. But in our case, we think it's mostly supply side factors. The fuel subsidy removal also also affected inflation. We also had high global energy prices affect inflation, and of course, the rapid depreciation of the naira was also one of the costs of inflation. So these are essentially costs of inflation. So if you look at it and you say, look, how do we see inflation rate reducing? Based on this, the fuel subsidy has been removed already, so it's not going to be brought back as it was before. So obviously, this will continue to have an impact on inflation as global energy prices increase. Now, the naira is still depreciating, and remember, the central bank governor a few days ago said that he only sees stable exchange rate when we start to see inflation reduce, and then we start to see output increase. It was quite startling. He said that a few days ago. And so based on what you see, do you think inflation rate is going to drop? Probably will because of what we call base effects. But in terms of dropping structurally, likely going to be very difficult. And of course, there's also high logistics and transportation costs, mostly due to insecurity. And then we still have difficulty in ease of doing business. I was speaking to someone a few days ago, and the person said, look, there is an item that we used to import in this country. It was duty-free, right? So they had gotten into a contract to import the thing for $20,000 and then paid. And as the thing was already on its way to Nigeria, the customs just changed their prices unannounced and now impose duty on that particular item. So how do businesses plan in environments like this? So that is all what we call ease of doing business. So it's very difficult to do business in this country, and that tends to affect inflation rate. And so this is inflation across the country. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with these numbers. But what is interesting is that inflation seems to be quite concentrated around the southern part of Nigeria. It's bad everywhere, to be honest. It's bad, and that's why, as you can see, we have it here as high, very high, and galloping. And it's bad everywhere, but we tend to see a lot more high inflation in the southern part of Nigeria, where you have red. So inflation is pretty much prevalent in these parts. People have also had their own share of commentary on inflation. I shared this on my social media profile some months ago, just to get people to comment on what they think about inflation. It's pretty interesting, as you can see. Different people have reacted differently to inflation. The question was, what have you stopped buying due to inflation in Nigeria? Look at this guy. It says bought a 4-liter gallon of extra virgin olive oil for about 20,000 just before inflation really hits full gear, and today there's just about a liter left. After that, it's back to the trenches. Remember, I defined the trenches before, because 1 liter is now almost 12,000. So imagine 4 liters. He bought 4 liters for 20,000, and now he's now buying 1 liter for 12,000. So this guy can't even afford it anymore. This one said that he canceled his trip to Lagos due to cost of flight. This one says he has stopped Sunday in Kwabi. Yeah, this guy used to enjoy his Kwabi before. Now he can't even eat in Kwabi again. He stopped buying Greek yogurt because of inflation. This person says since last year, he only turns on his generator twice because he can't just afford. This person says he stopped alcohol, he stopped weekly grocery shopping. Somebody here said he sold his car and got an Elantra. He sold an ML350 and got an Elantra for work because he or she just can't afford the cost of fuel. This person said, I've stopped eating breakfast and lunch. I'm basically on 001. Here's what this person said that he stopped. He stopped eating crunchy nuts, eating turkey, going where I was not invited, visiting people in far places, and going where they are spending money. Sometimes it's very good to just avoid things that give you problems. And this is what people are going through. Somebody else said, I sold one of my dogs. Stopped dog crunchies, stopped stocking the fridge with chicken. We buy in beets now. Move from refined ground oil to abroad. So, it's just crazy how people are trying to adapt to the challenges of inflation. And this is essentially what a lot of Nigerians are experiencing. I'm sure a lot of you are also experiencing this, that several things in your expense line that you may have cut off. And this is what we try to depict here for everyone. So what are the headwinds for inflation that we see? High energy prices might persist due to geopolitical tensions. I did mention that earlier on. The electricity subsidy that is currently in place, we think is not sustainable. At some point, government will have no choice but to increase electricity prices. So that would also have an effect on inflation. Weakening purchasing power continues to be a problem because as you see the purchasing power of your Naira dwindle, people tend to want to dollarize their investment. So that would also have a spiraling effect or a cascading effect on inflation. Or of course, I mentioned here, more currency depreciation is expected. Higher borrowing cost. The central bank yesterday sold treasury bills at 19%, guys. It was 11% before. Just last month, they sold at 19%. So if the government is borrowing at 19%, of course, they're doing this because they want to reduce the money supply in the economy and attract forex. It then means that borrowing will be expensive. So your loans are about to get even more expensive because of increasing borrowing costs. And of course, Nigerians are likely going to spend less on non-essential items. I showed you that in the slide before, and more sachetization and shrinkflation. So when you buy a sachet of milk, please, you know that when you buy a sachet of milk, before now, 25% of the content was air. Now, don't be surprised when it's 75% of the content that is air, and it's just a little bit part of it. In fact, you can fold the sachet like 10 times. You can fold it. That's how you know, there's such as shrinkflation. That essentially is all symptomatic of a high inflationary environment. I think it was just a few days ago that NAFDAC said it was going to ban sachetization of alcohol. What they don't understand is that is all people are sachetizing not because they think it's a good business, but it's sachetized because they're only just trying to meet the purchasing power of Nigerians. People can't buy things in bottles anymore. They just want to buy things in bite sizes, and that is why you're seeing an increase in sachetization. Don't be surprised if you see fuel sold in sachet. I'm just kidding. All right, so you go to tailwinds. What do we think is going to happen? Base effects could lead to lower inflation rates. I mentioned that earlier. The CBN is tightening monetary policy by raising rates. So that tends to have a muted effect on inflation as well. And then the government is focusing on infrastructure in this year and the next few years. And if they continue to increase infrastructure, hoping that leads to economic growth, you would see its effect on inflation. Imagine if the roads to most cities are a lot better than it is, or our interstate roads are all done, then it's going to be faster for people to move goods from one part of the country to the other, and that will impact prices. And of course, insecurity, reduction of insecurity is a tailwind, even though we are now seeing insecurity spike, which is a big problem because we should expect that insecurity should be reducing, because the lower the insecurity, the easier for us to predict lower inflation or to see this as a tailwind. Emergency on food is what I expect very soon. In fact, I think there's been meetings, there was a couple of meetings yesterday and 2 days ago on solving Nigeria's food crisis. The government sees this as a potential security threat. So they're trying to address it. I would not be surprised if a federal emergency is called on Nigeria's food crisis so that that could help. I know that the government is also looking towards a bountiful harvest as maybe one of those problems, one of those solutions that they see. But more than ever, I think they need to call an emergency on food crisis, and I expect that to happen anytime soon. The central bank has taken away its ban on 41 items, and so expect to see cheaper imports to offset the cost of local goods. Like I mentioned here, this is a local good, and so I'm pretty sure that an imported version of this might outcompete Vitamilk and could be a lot cheaper than it currently is. And so that is, what cheaper imports does bring to the table. And so we'll move to exchange rates, which I'm sure has been on the mind of a lot of people. So since the unification of exchange rates in June last year, what have we seen? We've seen this disparity here. See this gap. The official rate was going at about 450 for most part of last year, while the black market was around 750. What happened when the rate was merged? When it was merged, we did see a little bit of unification, and then boom, everything just went haywire. And now you're seeing the black market trading way above the official market. But now, this was as of last year, but today, we're now even seeing the official market trade higher than the black market. So what has been the cause of this? Of course, a lot of the CBN policies that has come up. CBN is adopting a two-pronged approach. Unlike the CBN under Emefiele, the CBN under Emefiele focused a lot more on demand management. They thought that our demand for Forex was a major contributory factor to exchange rate depreciation, and so wanted to curb demand and also curb capital controls. That had a ripple effect on the exchange rate because we immediately devalued to 750. Now, the current government now adopted a different approach, which is to stimulate supply. So open up or lift the restrictions that we had on the supply side, and then also allow the market to determine the price. And that's what they thought was a better solution. In their mind, doing that will restore confidence in the exchange rate market, and of course, instigate Forex inflow into the country. So far, so good. It's still early days, but it hasn't really worked. What we've seen is the exchange rate go from about 750 or so to over 1,500 naira to the dollar. That's what we've seen even in the official market. Exchange rate has been sold at that kind of rate. So it's very interesting to see how this pans out, because whether we like it or not, like I mentioned, and like Cardoso mentioned, you do need to see inflation will drop and output grow for you to have a stable exchange rate. But more than ever, what stabilized the exchange rate for Nigeria has always been capital inflow. And you can see that in this slide here. If you all remember, in 2019, we used to have sorry? Okay, just an interference. All right, so as you can see, in 2019, we had capital importation very high. You can see it used to be around $20 billion. We had about $20 billion in capital importation in 2019, and this was when the central bank offered interest rate at about 19%. And so a lot of flow came into the country, and that stabilized the exchange rate at 365 naira, 366 naira to the dollar, if you all remember, for about 2 years or more. But when the central bank now started unwinding capital importation, we now saw COVID now came in, and then a lot of that dollars that we're expecting essentially just got out of the window. And as you can see, Nigeria's capital importation is driven mostly by foreign portfolio investment. That's investment that goes to the stock market and goes to Nigeria's bond market. And we see that it essentially just plummeted completely. And that is why you're seeing the exchange rate devalue quite rapidly. So if for Nigeria's exchange rate to improve, you need to see capital importation also. 1 second. All right, thank you very much. So we now move to the next slide. Just a second, I think this thing is hanging. All right, so what are the headwinds I see for capital importation itself. Higher global interest rate is a challenge. The higher the interest rate globally, the more difficult it is for foreign investors to want to bring money into the country. You know that Nigeria is not alone as the countries that are looking for dollars. Nigeria is essentially competing with other foreign countries to attract investment. So when those countries offer high interest rates, then it becomes increasingly difficult for Nigeria to attract investment. And so that is why the central bank moved these rates from 11% to 19% for treasury bills, with the hope that that might convince foreign investors to bring their money into the country. And of course, if the crisis does not improve, then that becomes a headwind for capital, because foreign investors are not just going to bring money into the country when they are not sure that the crisis would improve. So they need to be sure that the crisis is resolved for us to get money in the country. And of course, we still have challenges with inflation and monetary policy as well. And the tailwinds that I see, the drivers are geopolitical pressures. I mentioned that earlier. The more they continue to scramble for resources in Africa, the more African countries or African governments are able to pressure the West and the East to bail out African countries. Higher bond yields, I mentioned, and then we have a vibrant diaspora population, and then regional trade agreements such as the AFCFT could also be a tailwind for importing capital into Nigeria. In terms of foreign trade, I don't want to waste too much time here. Foreign trade also does affect how Nigeria uses its foreign exchange. The more we export, the better for us. So currently, in terms of foreign trade, we have a positive trade balance, which means we export more than we import. But this is largely dominated by crude. So for us to maybe want to see our exports increase, we need to export a lot more than crude oil. And that way we can see stable exchange. But it's a good news that we're seeing a lot more exports than imports as at when this data was released for September 2023. So we move on to crude oil exports. So crude oil exports, like I mentioned, is our major export. We've been seeing it increase over the last few quarters. So let's hope that we continue to sustain this. We should expect to see crude oil exports sort of be around 15-20 trillion for that to really make a solid impact on the government. Just last week, the government announced that crude oil revenues from crude oil export should now be domiciled with the NNPC. So maybe if that happens, we might start to see some kind of improvement in Nigeria's FX profile. But one thing that's very clear is that this number here, 1.4 million barrels per day, which is averagely what we're doing, really needs to increase. We need to see our crude oil exports at least 1.8 million barrels per day. I mean, imagine even Dangote refinery can't even buy crude oil for Nigeria because we just don't export enough, and that's the problem. So when Saudi Arabia with a lot less population is doing about 10 million barrels per day, Nigeria is still stuck at 1.4 million barrels per day. So that is a huge challenge for us as a country if we're to continue to retain capital importation. So I also have outlook for foreign trade here. I wouldn't want to waste too much time here because time is fast running. And then for outlook for exchange rate, so my outlook for exchange rate is it's pretty simple. There's a lot of challenges, and I don't see the exchange rate stabilizing anytime soon. When I did this presentation early in the year, I actually predicted 1.5 to that we might hit 1.5 in 2024, and we're there already. So government, the central bank is trying to do a lot of things to solve the problem, but the key thing is how government spends its money and inflation. And so because I don't see those things decoupling anytime soon, I expect to see the currency still depreciate. Now, it might not depreciate as much as it has been doing in the last few weeks. And what I mean is that it's probably not going to go from 1.5 to 2,000 in 1 week, but it might slowly get there. Of course, that also depends on whether foreign investors now sees Nigeria as a good place to invest in. So overall, my outlook for the exchange rate is for it to be weaker this year, but not as bad as last year, because last year I think we did over 40% depreciation. I don't expect us to be at that sort of levels. Perhaps 20-25% depreciation is what I see this year. So that is my outlook for exchange rate. So let's go straight to economic growth. So as one of those things that I did mention as the challenge that we're having. So our economic growth is not really fast. And as you can see here, real GDP is just somewhere around 3%. For Nigeria to be growing fast, we need to see our economic growth at 6, 7, 8%. That way we start to feel the vibe and feel the country growing. But we're struggling, of course, because of some of those things I mentioned when I showed you our trajectory of challenges in Nigeria. And so, and then if you also look at our economic growth in general, Nigeria's economy is largely service-driven. Now, it's a good thing that we're service-driven, but the problem with service-driven economy is it doesn't really create a lot of jobs. And so if you see from the perspective of economic growth, industry is not quite good. And so, and that's because a lot of companies are shutting down, and it's been like that since the 80s, like I mentioned earlier. So as you can see, in terms of economic composition, we do need to see industrial sector increase as a composition of Nigeria's GDP. And this is one of my favorite tables because this just shows how Nigeria's sectoral GDP has changed over the years and how government policies also drive the composition of your GDP. And as you can see, in the years before 2016, or in 2016, trade was the number one sector in the country. But today, it is crop production. Imagine, trade was 20.6 trillion in 2016, but crop production has even doubled that, more than double that growth, and then almost tripled its own level in 2016. So the economy has changed in terms of the leading sectors. Today, it is crop, trade, and construction. Construction is actually the one that surprised me the most. Well, maybe not a surprise because it was expected. Construction is by far one area of focus for the government. And interesting that construction was not even in the top 5. Construction was just number 9 in 2016 at 3.6 trillion. It has now gone 6 times to about 18.6 trillion. So if I ask you, what do you think is going to happen to the GDP in the next 4 years based on the policies of the current government? I expect to see education increase the next 4 years. I expect to see electricity, gas, and steam increase in the next 4 years. Even healthcare, I expect healthcare to sneak into the top 20 as well. And then road transport would likely also grow. And then also this top 5 will continue to be dominant in the sector. And one sector that I expect to also come up is downstream, because what we have currently is crude petroleum, which is essentially upstream. I expect to see downstream in here. If you're not taking notes, giving you an idea of the sectors that you should see as leading sectors in the country, or sectors that will drive economic growth in Nigeria in the years to come. So what are my headwinds or my tailwinds for economic growth? FG is serious about diversifying the economy. So that would help propel economic growth. We have a very good demographic. Nigeria is full of a lot of young people, which is very good for economic growth. Nigeria is also, the government has also showed sign of seriousness when it comes to digital economy. So that would also propel growth. Foreign investment, if it does come, will help with growth. And then the government is solidly focused on investment in infrastructure. If that pans out well, that also has positive effect on economic growth. And of course, the agricultural monetization wave continues. I did mention that we face a food crisis. So long as the government sees food as one area that it really needs to step up, and then the modernization of our entire agri space by of course moving into full-scale mechanized farming will help propel economic growth. So moving to monetary policy, which is what is under the purview of the central bank. The central bank governor has made it clear that his own monetary policy mantra is price stability, and that is what he's doing. So what is the outlook for him? He's expecting to see the domestic economy remain positive. He's hoping that inflation will drop and then the exchange rate will be stable. That is what he's looking at. Even Cardoso is expecting us He thinks that we should be at about 1.8 million barrels per day that I mentioned, which is actually Nigeria's OPEC quota, but we're nowhere close there at all. He did a speech a few months ago, which I captured here. I don't want to go through, spend too much time in there. Let's just go straight into fiscal policy, which is what the government is looking at. And this is where I really have a problem, guys, and why I'm worried about where we're going to as a country. So the government's 2024 budget is hinged on these assumptions. I mean, look at the exchange rate assumptions. Does it look realistic that this is where the exchange rate will be this year? But this is what the government is using as its base of assumptions for its budget. And look at the assumptions for inflation. The central bank governor said this is their inflation target, but is it likely that we would be at 21% with all these headwinds that I've mentioned? I seriously doubt it. And this is essentially what the government is looking at. The government is even targeting 1.7 million barrels of crude oil per day. Currently, things are going with the level of crude oil theft. Is it really possible that we could be at this level? And so when you see these things and you know that this is what is driving economic growth, or sorry, the 2024 budget, you tend to worry. Even the government is looking at a GDP of $1 trillion, but look at their 2026 GDP projection of 292 trillion, which is, you know, less than $300 billion, right, in 2 years. So how do you now get to $1 trillion based on this projection? So that's my challenge. I think that their assumptions and their numbers are kind of all over the place, and that creates a huge problem for us in the economy. And this is the 2024 budget. And this was the proposed budget, slightly different from what was passed, but the numbers are essentially the same, guys. We're seeing the deficit of 9 trillion. Remember that I mentioned it earlier, that fiscal deficit is one of the problems. So 9 trillion means that we're going to borrow an extra 8 trillion just to meet the budget deficit, because the revenue is just 18 trillion and you're trying to spend 27.5 trillion. How do you expect your exchange rate to be stable when you have this sort of fiscal outlook? And this is the budget of renewed hope. So that is the challenge that I have. And when you see things like this, you tend to worry about the immediate impact of their policies and whether their policies can actually deliver the sort of successes or improvements in the economy that we're looking for. And so this is my challenge. And of course, the government is going to be very focused on increasing taxes or generating taxes. And so they've appointed VAT and tax collecting. They want to appoint VAT and tax collection agents. So expect to see a lot of people come into your offices to want to be sure that you're paying taxes. That in a way can be like harassment. So make sure that your finance department are very well equipped, because you're going to see a lot of that. The government is also reducing tax waivers. They believe that tax waivers is a revenue leakage for the government. At least that's what the tax desk that Taiwo Oyedele is heading is trying to reduce. They want to improve technology and automation of our tax processes. And of course, the FIRS and most tax authorities are going to be a lot much better linked to databases, especially of banks, so that they can see how your money is flowing, and then they can improve how they are able to tax you. And so there's a lot of tax generation plans for the government that in a way is good, because that also helps their fiscal profile. But for businesses, that is a potential headwind that we all need to worry about, because that's what the government wants to do in 2024. And so what's my outlook for fiscal policy? I put them in two buckets: revenue and spending. Because maybe if we hope that we're going to see an increase in crude oil this year, very likely that the government might want to increase VAT. There's pressure on them to increase VAT, especially from the IMF, to take VAT up. VAT in most African countries is 17.5%. In Nigeria is 7.5%. So there's thinking, or there's chatter that maybe that might be on the table, but the government has claimed so far that they're not looking to increase taxes by any means. And of course, there's going to be a lot of PPP deals, that's public-private partnership deals, because government alone cannot fund our infrastructure deficit. So there's going to be a lot of partnership with private companies. Government would rely also on privatization to boost its revenues. On the spending side, and this is where I worry, the labor unions have already asked for minimum wage to be increased from 30,000 to 400,000 plus. How is this country going to afford that? But that's the spending. So there's going to be a lot of spending, and the government is also looking at spending to save the poor as well. So this just a very strange outlook here from a revenue and spending perspective. But if you look at this, it kind of sounds like you're going to see a lot more spending than revenue in 2024, and I dare say to 2026 as well. So what are the key takeaways for me from a fiscal point of view? We're going to keep seeing an expansionary government. There's going to be more debt going forward to meet government spending, more taxes, might not be increase in taxes, but increase in the amount of taxes that you pay, as well as more regulation. You would see Western-friendly economic policies, like I mentioned, that the government would want to attract funding from the West. Free markets, which is the exchange rate is free, but a twist of socialism. Just yesterday, a court ruled that the government should fix prices of some goods and services. Incredible. We actually still have the Price Control Act, in case a lot of people don't know that. And that act gives government powers to fix prices. So it's sort of like a mix of free markets and a little bit of socialism. And socialism, of course, is government trying to take money from the rich and spending it on the poor. So expect to see a lot of that. Less emphasis on local production. The Buhari administration was very focused on local production. This time around, looks like the current government is not so focused on it. If you listen to a lot of their sound bites, it's more around trying to just everybody just come in, whatever it takes to bring down inflation. The economy is back to business, in quotes. And then to me, this is likely the most powerful government that we've ever seen in terms of their influence. National Assembly, of course, is divided into PDP and APC and Labour Party, but the dominant party there is APC, and even the PDP itself, they tend to say that we call them PDP, APC. So I don't know, but I think this is the most powerful government as well. And then suffering and smiling continue for now. So that essentially is my key takeaways for the economy in 2024. So despite all these challenges, there are opportunities, and there are, the opportunities out there. And I try to, put down some of the opportunities that I see maybe for all of us. The government, like I mentioned earlier, is going to want to increase interest rates. So what that means is that a lot of the naira that you have count a lot more in terms of returns. Treasury bills has gone from 11% to 19%. So that means you have a lot more returns that you can get. And of course, there's investment in dollar yielding assets. So more than ever, it's very important that people also hedge their risk by investing in dollar yielding assets. A lot of us here all have families abroad. People even have children schooling abroad. So how are you going to fund that with your local asset? It can't just work again. There's nothing that you sell in Nigeria that you convert to dollar that's just going to be enough for you to meet your foreign currency obligations. So what people need to start to do now is look for dollar yielding assets that can help you with your foreign currency obligation. So I actually see that as an opportunity for a lot of businesses or a lot of people who are involved in helping people, invest in dollar yielding assets. And of course, there's going to be continuous diversification away from oil as a mainstay of government's revenue sources. And so that means that creates opportunities for agricultural, manufacturing, renewable energy, and technology. Like I mentioned in the slide before, that was this slide. I did mention how this whole GDP, the composition of our GDP will change in the next few years. And so that is what I mean here as well, by opportunities as the government, diversifies. Digital transformation is very key. So the government actually created a ministry of digital, whatever. So that alone gives you an idea of how the government is seeing technology as a way of transforming the economy. So opportunities in e-commerce, fintech, edtech, healthcare, health tech, digital services across the board, I think is something that we need to look out for. So that's one area of opportunity that I see. There's also going to be opportunity in infrastructure development, particularly in public-private partnerships. I mentioned that Nigeria has a huge infrastructure deficit. And so to drive economic growth, the government sees enabling infrastructure as a way to achieve that. And so that would require a lot of construction. So businesses in the construction sector, engineering, transport, logistics sector should see a boom over the next few years if the government continues with this policy. Agri sector revitalization is something that no need to delve into that. That started in the Buhari administration. It's likely going to continue in the current administration, even though my focus is, I think, more on a more mechanized level. So let's expect to see a lot more of that in the next few years. And then the interesting one is renewable energy and sustainability. I mentioned earlier on in my presentation that the US had passed what it calls is Inflation Reduction Act, and that act provides trillions of dollars in investment in solar, wind, hydro energy, and climate change reduction businesses. So businesses in this area are actually the ones that are attracting funding today. For, I mean, a lot of organizations that seem to be able to tap funding for projects are organizations that are in the sustainability space. So that opportunity remains, and the Nigerian government is also locked into renewables as well. So expect opportunities there. Financial inclusion and fintech, don't want to delve too much there. That was one of the fastest growing economy sectors in the economy in the last few years. It's going to continue. Think about it, guys. 5 years ago, who was Money Point? Who was OP? Well, we know who they are, household name now. So there's going to be more household names like that as policies starts to merge with technology. Export promotion, very key. Nigeria needs to be an export market for us to keep the currency stable. So the government, the new government and the new central bank will do everything possible to keep exports on the front burner. We all see what the Jackpot wave is causing. And so what that means is that there's going to be a lot of human capital development requirements in Nigeria. I did mention education as one of those sectors, particularly sectors that relate to vocational skills. So skills that you easily don't see. So as more Nigerians Jackpot, there's got to be a pipeline to bring these guys back. And remember, we're trying to stimulate the entire economy. So we need solid manpower for our economy to grow. And we all know that skill is one thing that we're lacking in Nigeria. So I'd see that as an opportunity. Local manufacturing, as much as I think local manufacturing is going to struggle, but there are some goods produced locally that might be able to compete with foreign ones. I'm sure a lot of people who are more vast in this know that. So those sort of goods would find opportunity in the next few years, in this year and in the next few years, particularly under this administration. Tourism and entertainment is likely to be a sector that will grow. I kind of think that it's a very low-hanging fruit. Nigeria is blessed tourism-wise, just that there's no investment there. But the feelers we're getting now is that a lot of state governments see this as a way to attract investment in their states. I mean, what can they do? There's really nothing much they can do than use the natural resources or the landscape of their states to boost tourism. And so you're going to see a lot of businesses coming here. I know a lot of states that are already setting up areas or masses of land, created different economic zones to drive manufacturing and even tourism in their state. So this is likely to continue. And of course, I do see opportunities in the downstream sector with the advent of the Dangote refinery. Now that the refinery is fully operational, or, well, as they say, operational, that also creates opportunities across the country on the logistics level. It's likely going to open up. And let's remember that this refinery is not just about PMS and diesel. It's about the entire value chain of what is produced from crude oil. So that is also what I see as an opportunity, especially from the marketing point of view. So this essentially is the opportunities that I see. So what are the things to watch in closing? Will Nigeria be sufficiently able to address the root cause of the macroeconomic challenges? That is one thing that we all need to watch. We also need to watch inflation. Is inflation going to go down? Money supply is at 77 or so trillion currently, which is almost a third of GDP, but we need money supply to be at least 25% of nominal GDP. So is the CBN's plan to suck money out of the economy going to work? Just yesterday, they sucked over $1 trillion out of the economy in just one swing. And so $1 trillion is out of the economy now in the covers of the central bank. And that's just this week's treasury bill sale. And so what are they going to do in the coming weeks, and how much are they going to be able to suck out of the economy? Sucking that out helps also manage inflation. I've already identified growth areas for you. Just again, healthcare, sports, entertainment, potential growth areas. And then progress towards creating an efficient government. Are we going to see a more efficient government, or a government that is largely inefficient? That I want to tell signs that I want to see as we go on. If it looks like this is a government that is going to be run very efficiently, then I think it's a positive sign for us. And then finally, access to capital markets. Are we going to see a lot more private companies list on the stock exchange? If that happens, that is a clear sign that we're on a trajectory towards economic growth. So these are the things to watch. For me, I missed everything that I've said in the last hour, 10 minutes. So I think this is the last slide of my presentation. Thank you so much. I need to take a break. I'll take some water. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate the depth of presentation, and I think everyone on this call will agree with me that that's so elaborate, and depth is very, very encouraging, and we say thank you so much, sir. We have few minutes to ask questions, and as I said earlier, this is the time for question and answer, and we have, for those that will be interested in asking the question directly, just do that by raising of hands, and we'll acknowledge you. And if you feel like sharing the questions in the chat box, we'll appreciate that. So I read that, and Mr. Dre will attend to them actually. So before we acknowledge Mr. Frederick Aditipa, there is a question that has been sent while the presentation was going on from Mr. David Ajayi. Says, sir, business intelligence in relation to the economy is important to various organizations. How can one learn or undertake this task of giving such intelligence or analysis to our organizations with the aim of helping the firm plan long-term and short-term? Did you get the question, sir?
Oh, is that question to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
can I go over it?
Yes, please go ahead.
He said, business intelligence in relation to economy is important to various organizations. How can one learn or undertake the task of giving such intelligence or analysis to organizations with the aim of helping the firm plan long-term or short-term?
All right, so business intelligence is very key to how a lot of businesses are run today, and that's particularly important in an environment where there's just so much data. A lot of businesses sit on an enormous amount of data that they don't even know that they have. And so one way to harness it is to have a clear business intelligence strategy. How do you introduce things like artificial intelligence as a tool to harnessing all the data that you have? One way to go about that is to immediately within your organization, have a clear, data strategy. You want to move a lot of your data to the cloud, and then you want to now layer that AI on the data that you have in the cloud. And of course, you also need to build manpower in your organization that can, use a lot of the analytics that come out of the data that you mine, and then now use that to provide actionable intelligence to your businesses. That can usually put you ahead of competition because there's just so much that you know. And when decision is making on the back of data, it tends to provide you with a useful sprot because you are way ahead of your competition, and then you better know how your business is run. In fact, BI these days is even beyond assessing product or product pricing or product placement and things like that. BI is also used to even understand how your organization is run, how your staff, the skill level of your employees. BI is also used operationally as well. BI can also even help with cost reduction. With solid BI, you can even know areas of your business where you're running efficiently, and then move some of those resources to efficient areas. But to do that, you really need to first, start by implementing a clear BI strategy. So good point, but you got to do that first. It can be quite expensive depending on how much data your organization produces. For bigger companies, BI can be as much as BI can cost. Having a very solid BI, infrastructure can be as much as $1 million. But for smaller businesses, you're probably looking at maybe between $10,000 to $100,000, depending on the amount of data that you have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Okay, so Mr. Frederick Adetiba, can you unmute and ask your question?
All right, thank you. Thank you, Olumide, for the opportunity. And I want to start by appreciating Mr. Ugo Obichukwu for this incisive presentation. It's quite brilliant. I want to ask, we have a growing creative sector, and also, of course, we've always also had diaspora remittances to the economy. I want to find out from you, how significant would the contribution from the creative sector, the growing creative sector, and diaspora remittances make to the economy? And are these even captured at all? Do we pay attention? Are they significant enough for us to even pay attention to them? Thank you.
Thank you. Another brilliant question. So let me start with the diaspora, Nigerians. So as much as a lot of people see the Japa wave as a major headwind, because of course, it means that we're losing a lot of talent to foreign countries. It does have its own advantage. And the advantage that it has is that now also represents some kind of export for Nigeria. And diaspora remittances alone gives Nigeria, I think, depending on who you're getting the data for, diaspora remittances gives Nigeria around 20 or so $1 billion annually, depending on the data that you're looking at. And so doing that alone, having a lot more people emigrate out of Nigeria does has its own effect, positive effects. And so even India, where you've seen, where that is leading globally in terms of economic growth, a lot of Indians today run some of the largest companies that you have globally. And these people still have huge affinity back home and still send money back home. And so I remember the skill migration we're seeing now, is mostly skilled people. And so these guys would have a higher earning potential than the Nigerians that we saw leave Nigeria maybe several years ago. Or in the previous, because we've always had, every decade always have a wave of Japa. And so the kind of people that are leaving now, a lot better in terms of skill and relevant skill, if I can even qualify it that way, than what we had before. And so that has a positive effect as well. I mean, the temporary effect is that it's going to affect economic growth locally, because as you're losing skill, then companies struggle to provide excellent service. They would struggle. But which is why I said we need to start to now create very good pipelines to absorb a lot of the people that are exiting Nigeria. So I see that as a good thing. So in terms of the creative sector, yes, the creative sector is actually captured in Nigeria's GDP. But what is interesting, and that I've always found interesting, is that in terms of the size of the creative sector, the creative sector as a size, GDP size, is about 300 or so billion naira. So it's not really a large sector per se. And that includes a lot of the things that we're doing in Nollywood, a lot of the things that we're doing in Nigeria's music music sector as well, and entertainment and all that. So it's not that much. But if you add motion picture, maybe sound recording to art, entertainment, and recreation, we probably will be looking at a GDP of, okay, just let me check that data, of about, almost 2 trillion, about 1.8 trillion. And so that is the size of that whole economy. So that economy is captured, but I also see it as an area of growth. It hasn't been growing of late, not as much as we think. The challenge for me is a lot of the revenue or a lot of the growth that we're seeing in that sector is not necessarily being captured even here in Nigeria. So think about a lot of the music videos being shot by a lot of our amazing artists. Those videos are shot outside the country. They're not necessarily shot here in Nigeria. And so that is also a challenge. So, and when they're not shot here in Nigeria, you don't capture the revenue here. It's not part of the growth that we're creating. And then even these guys, a lot of their concerts are held outside the country. And so when they are held outside the country, that revenue is not necessarily captured here. And these guys sell tickets in dollars. And so you don't also capture that. As much as it's export, even that export tends to be kept outside the country. And these guys also live outside the country. So if you even look at how their content is consumed via a lot of these streaming platforms, that revenue, again, is also mostly outside the country. So yes, that sector is growing and is very important to how Nigeria grows in the next few years, or how output is what our output growth looks like in the next few years. But what the government needs to start to look at is how can we capture a lot more of the value that sector is creating locally than abroad. So that would be my take on your question. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. We have other few hands up. So I would like to acknowledge first Mr. Peter Oyedepo. If you have the floor, can you unmute and ask a question?
Thank you very much. I love this, this program so much. Most especially the presenter, Mr. Ugo, who have been following his write-up and his parametrics. Very brilliant gentleman. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
My question is, I don't know how other people are going to take my question, but me, I want to learn. When Nefeli was sacked, I understand that one of government policy or some of government policy are, one, Naira is going to be floated, and secondly, foreign exchange is going to be matched. But today, I still see different rates in parallel markets, in official market. So I don't really understand what is happening. So I want to be educated. Is Naira really being floated? Are we still in the regime of official rate, parallel rate, or whatever? I want to know. Thank you.
All right. Interesting question. So to answer directly, based on what the central bank has said, the exchange rate is, we're operating what is called a managed float system, not a full float exchange. So a full float exchange rate basically is that market forces determine the exchange rate 100%. But what's interesting is that as much as they say we're operating a managed float system, it appears this phase of this managed float system is a full float, because we're now seeing the official rates adjust almost on a daily basis. And it is now in tandem with the black market rate. Now, mind you, there would always be a black market rate. It can't go. Even in most countries outside Nigeria, they also have a black market, because black market exists when you can't, when not everyone can access the official market. And it kind of makes sense. Think about it. There are people that have scrupulous reasons why they want to buy dollars, so they can't access dollars in official rate, so they can go and buy in the black market. Now, but the reason why black market is such a problem here is that the black market appears to be the main market. So even people who have legitimate reasons for dollars cannot get it from the official market. That is why the black market is so prevalent here in Nigeria. And also, the parallel market or black market, somebody says black market or parallel market, also means that the disparity between that market and the official market conventionally should be about 5%. Or max 10%. And if it's within that rate, I think is accommodative. But what we've seen is that there was a time the exchange was like 900 and then the official market was like 1.4. That's not good. So, but now we're now seeing both in around the same levels. Even though it sounds like the parallel market is what is now driving the official market rates, which we don't all want. But I think that this is just the first stage of where we are, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a convergence, and especially when people can buy FX from the official market, and then you can now see supply goes to the official market. You see a lot more of that convergence, and that's why, like I mentioned earlier in my presentation, the central bank started with the supply side of things and trying to deal with that. And that's what they've essentially done now. So we don't have a lot of rates at the official market. You'd often hear intraday high, intraday low, and then you hear the closing rates, and then you also hear the NAFEX. So let me explain. The intraday low is the is the lowest price that anyone would bid, or lowest price that the exchange was sold on that day. All right, then your intraday high is the highest that anyone bought exchange rate in that official market. Everybody can buy at the same price. Then the closing rate is the last rate that the exchange rate sold at that day. That's also how stock market works in a way. So that's why, but the rate you want to look at is the closing rates, okay? Now, the NAFEX is the average of the exchange rate over a period of time, and the FMDQ, that's where exchange rate is traded officially. They do have a format for determining the NAFEX price, but it's typically, in simple terms, just the average of those rates over a few days. And that is the rate that is often used by customs, or often used by government and all that, or even used by companies when they want to prepare their books. They often use that NAFEX rate. So that's it. And of course, black market is on one side, and black market, it's anybody's rate. So if I sell to you at 1,450, you can sell to somebody else at 1,470. It all depends on who wants to buy. So it's not like that rate can be fixed or can just be one. So what people also do is have an idea of what the range is to determine the exchange rate. So I hope that I responded to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Response. So right now we'd like to ask me, Ajani Lawson, to unmute and ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a great presentation. My question is about exports. That how do we counter the fluctuating exchange rate if we rely on FDIs, which are dependent on foreigners' decisions, oil that we already know is a decreasing resource? Why aren't we singing this bell of, the mantra of exports, that what can Nigerians export, other things, so that's one question. The second question is, based on the policies and what we've seen so far of the government, where are we heading? Are we heading for improvement or decline? And I put in the chat a comparison to Venezuela. Venezuela too is an oil-rich company, solely dependent on oil, and gradually over the decades reached into a crisis. Are we heading there? And what can we do to turn around if we are heading there? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ma. That's a loaded question. If we begin to go through this, I'm not sure we'll finish it, but let me just try and address it. So, how do we counter the exchange rate by relying only on FVI and FPI? And I think that I did tweet that yesterday, that look, and even the central bank governor said it, the long-term solution to exchange rate stability is not to always wait for FDIs and FPIs to come in. No, that's not going to work. Even when they had the Asian crisis of the 2000s, they got a bailout from the IMF, but a lot of those Asian countries were able to come out of that situation by focusing a lot on exports. So that should be the direction of the country. But it's a long-term solution. What do we actually have export competitiveness in Nigeria? Because export is not just a word. You just don't say you want to export. Your export needs to be competitive in terms of quality and price for it to, be meaningful. And that is where government needs to focus on. How do you ensure that a lot of the things that Nigerians are exporting are of very solid quality and are competing globally? I think we're very weak there. There's also a challenge around even getting things exported. There was an exporter who told me that, look, he imports things faster into the country than he exports, which is just crazy. So your goods can be at the port for weeks just because you want to export. So that is also, what I mentioned as part of the ease of doing businesses that we face in our export. So Nigeria is not very serious yet about export. What you just hear is a lot of sound bites and a lot of meetings and talk. They're not very serious. Like even the crude oil that we even export, we're not even exporting it to the maximum capacity that we potentially have. So that is my own challenge. But in the short term, while we fix our export issues, well, we have to just focus on FDI and FPIs. And that's the problem. I heard the central bank governor call it, say it's not hot money. He doesn't see it as hot money. But you know what? That's what it is, because FPIs, once there's a challenge in your country, they're out. They take their money out. And guess what? A lot of at the beginning of my slide, I did mention geopolitical issues. One of the things that China and even Russia has done in the last decade is try and win themselves out of falling into the trap.
24.
So we
please, can you mute if you're not talking? Can you please mute?
Thank you. So what they've also tried to do.
No, what I'm saying is that because you didn't.
What they've tried to do is win themselves out of the challenges, out of some of the powers, economic powers that the West have, such as maybe imposing power to impose sanctions. And so what they essentially just diversify the economy. So in Russia, for example, Russians realized that, look, the sooner after the Crimea War, they realized that the sooner we sort out our local ability to produce what we eat, then we will rely less on the West for food, because with a simple Western embargo, then we're just going to be in trouble. And then even China as well said, look, we need to also decouple from reliance on Western financial integration like SWIFT, right? And reliance on the dollar as a major way of trading. And that's why you're seeing the BRICS as well come up with their own, thinking of coming up with their own currency. And so, yes, as much as hot money is good in the short term, it's also a major economic diplomacy tool, right? And so for Africa and Nigeria, especially, the long-term solution here is how we can, stimulate our own local production and then focus on exporting competitively. Again, I use the word competitively. It's not just export. You got to be able to export competitively. So as you support local production, support that local production in a way that they can produce things competitively, not just in terms of quality, but also in terms of price. And then in terms of business policy, I don't know, I kind of think that some of the market policies that I've seen, my own opinion, are in the right direction. The only challenge that I see here, and I've said it over and over again, is on the fiscal side. You cannot be, putting all the right policies on the monetary side, and then on the fiscal side, you're running the kind of deficits that we're running. So government needs to get serious about cutting a lot of the waste that we're seeing in governance.
They need to get serious about reducing their own headcount. Government, people in government position also need to take the first step. Nearly all, I mean, this is just a wild guess for me, but I think that most, if not all, of the people in government all have their children or families living abroad. So these people, think about it, imagine that there are 1,000 of them. They're all part of people contributing to demand pressure on the dollar. And when you have all their families living abroad, in fact, the 1% of Nigeria have most of their expenditure outside the country. And so that essentially puts pressure or makes mockery of whatever it is we're doing on the monetary side. So for me, these are the things that government, at least I need to see signs that they're trying to rein in on the fiscal excesses that we have in the country. And then once you start to see that sign, and then it starts to go in tandem with monetary policy, then a lot more confidence can be in some of the policies that they are putting together for the economy. But for now, like I mentioned, the market policies are fine, but on the fiscal side, I'm not so comfortable with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We still have 2 hands raised up, but before I call one of them, there are 2 questions in the chat box. I would like to raise one. I don't know if it's a Mr. Agri J. Uda said, sir, wouldn't reduction in tax waiver negatively impact the already struggling business in the present day Nigerian's economy? Did you get that question, sir?
Yes, I did. It will for sure. But let me ask you, how many companies really get those tax waivers anyways? And that's what government officials that I've asked told me. They said, look, it's not a lot of companies that get it. So it's just very few companies that tend to get this tax waivers. And the companies that get the tax waivers are companies that have the financial muscle to operate without the tax waivers. And so that's why they are reducing it. Some of those tax waivers are things like, extended pioneer status to a lot of companies that are immediately profitable. So they basically are taking those ones out. And the government believes that tax waivers contribute significantly to revenue leakages. And so that's why they're taking it out. But of course, tax waivers does have its own impact on how businesses survive. But at the same time, there's still a lot of tax incentives out there that can drive businesses. So what you need to do is, try and speak with your tax consultant and identify which one fits to your kind of business, and then how you can take advantage of them to reduce your tax exposure. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I'll quickly just call one of the participants, which is Oriofe Ayola. I'm sorry if it's a star or ma. Oriofe Ayola.
Good morning, Mr. Ochuko.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thank you very much for the training. I'm grateful. All right, so I have a question. As pertaining one of the slides you shared, sir. You said, thank you. I'm ready for the analysis you gave. So I want to ask about the exports. So I know I already hacked in the chat box, but what do you think the future is like for someone going into exports really? And yes, I just need your way of looking at it. And yeah, so what are the things? What are the pros and the cons, and the things that I should look forward to? And also having generating a community of exporters, also trying to do something to bring maybe like what I call it, the wealth of the nations to Africa. Thank you very much.
All right, great question. I think people who are into exports are very brave people, especially in Nigeria. I tend to classify them as exports is very, very key to how to economic resilience, particularly for Nigeria. But it's difficult. It's not as smooth as you would expect. There are several export incentives that the government has out there for exporters. Even though when you speak to exporters, they tell you that, look, they don't really enjoy a lot of let's speak to the potential of exports. So there's a lot of potential. For example, the AFCFTA that is currently being worked on provides a huge market for exporters in Nigeria. I did talk about export competitiveness. So if you're going to export, as much as exporting to European countries gives you that hard-earned dollars, and at least they're often the ones willing to pay, starting by exporting regionally might also be a good idea, because then that gives you a platform to at least test your export capabilities, gives you an opportunity to also hone your skill and hone your ability to produce quality exports, and then also allows you to understand that entire export value chain. And then from there on, you can now start to export into various markets outside the country. So I think that the opportunity is clear. And as I put in my slide, where you have this sort of economic correlation we have in Nigeria today, exports business is a no-brainer, because as the Naira continues to weaken, you continue to make more money. For example, I mentioned on my radio show on Monday, I guess you don't know, I have a radio show I do on Classic FM 8 to 8:30 every Monday. So on that show, there was a Nigerian company.
Where's that? Where do you have the show?
On Classic FM 8 to 8:30 on Mondays, every Monday, 8 to 8:30. It's called Follow the Money. So there, I mentioned a company. It's called Okomo Oil. That company was one of the few companies that had very minimal losses when it comes to FX, and they made huge profits in 2023, and they've been making profits since COVID, even though they have very minimal exports as a composition of their entire revenue, but they are very solid locally, because a lot of the local companies that need their entire oil palm, that need their inputs, cannot afford to import those things now. So they just focus on local companies. So as much as you also look at the export market, also look at the domestic market as well, because the domestic market is also able to accommodate a lot of the things that you might think you want to produce for exports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate time. We like to continue the conversation online, because we are far behind schedule, and say thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for in-depth sharing of knowledge and experience. And I want to believe that I'm representing the voices of everyone on this call. As you have done justice, this is a breakfast meeting. I will say thank you so much. I appreciate time.
Yeah, muted.
Thank you. Oh, apologies, sir.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry about that.
So I was just appreciating Mr.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me as well. I appreciate the time. Like I said, I mean, you can tune into Classic FM 8 to 8:30. Listen to me every Mondays. I think it's also on Spotify and anywhere you listen to your podcast. Just look for Nairametrics Follow the Money, and then you hear me there. And of course, we do also have master classes for macroeconomic outlook. So check any of our social media handles for that, where we also explain some of these economic issues to businesses who are looking to understand them and position themselves to reduce the risk that is associated with these sort of challenges. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate your time and wealth of experience being shared here. Say thank you. Really appreciate it. All right, before we close, I quickly just have a few information for every one of us before we call it a day. And just give me a second. Let me share my screen.
Just a second. I think we have a hand up. I don't know if you want to just give the person an opportunity to speak. The hand has been up for a while. I think the Bolaji. Balogun, Omobolaji Balogun.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I'm audible, but I'll just be very brief because I know we're trying to conclude and we're on a time constraint. But it's a very big opportunity to be able to share this very knowledgeable assets that we have. So I'll just go right to it. There was a question about the importance of exports to the economy. But I was looking at it from maybe from the problem or from the pervasive problem of inflation and the long-term measures that can be used to address it. Um, there was a lot mentioned around the fact that um, there is a need to be competitive with exports. But is it coming from the point that a lot of countries that have actually been successful, um, they've actually operated on a lot of protectionist policies where they close their economies?
Sorry, are you done with your question?
I'm asking, is Nigeria, is it possible for Nigeria to consider stronger protectionist measures in order to be able to um, reinvigorate its supply side or the supply side of its economy, just like countries like China and a lot of Southeast Asian countries have been able to do? Thank you.
Very good question. Personally, I think that I mean, people would like to call that mercantilist or something, policies. I think we've tried that. We tried that under the Buhari administration with border closure and trying to also stifle import, or what they call import substitution, different policies to favor local production. I mean, we did a lot of those things in the past, and it really didn't work. And it didn't work because local production, the quality of output wasn't that good, despite a lot of the money that was pumped in. Prices were also quite high, so it wasn't competitive enough, in terms of local production. And when it's not competitive, then it means you can't export. And then the cost of production in Nigeria, the factors that affect the cost of production in Nigeria is also quite high. So even if you try to produce things at a competitive level, you still face things like insecurity, logistics, transportation, electricity and power related problems, access to finance, high interest rates. So by the time businesses part all those things or include those things to their prices, it tends to go up. And so that means that for Nigeria to pursue those kind of policies, you would have to contend with high inflation for a number of time. And we've seen that happen in the last 4 years. And so that just didn't work. And that is why I always say, look, you got to go back to fiscal policy and fiscal responsibility. So if the government of the day is not fiscally responsible, then you're not going to see local production. I mean, if you want to protect Nigerian business, why don't you start by using made in Nigeria cars? Why should government officials be driving foreign made cars? You know what I mean? So you got to start from there. And then as you're even protecting, quote, local companies, you're just saying to yourself, what are the benchmarks that you're giving them? I read sometime in one book that when the likes of Hyundai and a lot of these Korean companies started, or even the Singaporean companies, part of what their government did was, as you're producing locally and we're giving you a lot of subsidies, you should be able to harness the export market. So if you cannot find markets that can buy your goods, we're going to pull away some of those incentives that we're giving you. So that way, businesses are also incentivized to do well. And the government, on the other hand, will provide the enabling environment. So these things all work hand in hand. And that's why I kind of think that, using these protectionist measures at the moment, the way the economy is set up, just won't work. It's just going to create more suffering for all of us because the goods that are going to be produced are going to be very expensive and we're not going to be able to afford them.
All right, thank you so much, sir. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. So right away we go. We would like to round up this session, and right now I would just like to take few announcements, and to start with, just to quickly do an overview of our services. For those that are just coming across the Society for Corporate Governance for the first time, our services ranges from board evaluation services, which we serve as independent consultants to evaluate the board of directors in various organizations. We have membership platforms where individuals can join and even corporate organizations can join. And there are many benefits of being a member of the Society for Corporate Governance, Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. And I want to implore every one of us that we are not a member yet to join us, to just reach out to us. We share the information on how to become a member. Then part of our services also include board enhancement program, where we have a tailor-made training for board of directors of various organizations in any sectors. Reach out to us. And we have board training program. This year, our calendar is out for the post events and communication. We will share our calendar if you do not have it yet. We have board governance advisory service, corporate governance audit service, board policy document development and review for those that want to develop a corporate governance policy or board policy document. We do development, we do review. Corporate governance advocacy, one of the events that as we are holding right now. And we have a board recruitment service. So you can reach out to us for any of these services, and you'll be glad you did. So we have few upcoming events, and one of it, Mr. Ogodre has mentioned. There is more to which there is more from which from where we got this information or the knowledge we got today from. And this event, this first event, is being hosted by Nairametrics. It's happening next week, Thursday and Friday. You can just reach out to them at info@nairametrics.com to get more information about this event. Then we have our ESG and board leadership training coming up this month. And I think it's a must for every organization to have a representative on this call. And ESG is no longer a buzzword, it's necessary strategy for every organization and for the board to understand their role in implementing ESG strategy. So this training is very much important for everyone of us. So we advise you reach out to us, and if you want to nominate your board, please speak to us. We send you the necessary information. Right, our IWD roundtable is on the way. It's happening next month, March 14. We like that you register for the event. The title of the theme of the event is Inclusive Leadership, Harnessing Diversity for Innovation, Resilience, and Sustainable Success. It's going to be an impactful discussion also. Also, in this quarter and same next month, we have board independence and corporate governance training. It's going to be very impactful, where we'll be talking about independence, because it's very important. Many people reach out to me and ask questions around independence, or how to have an independent directors on their board, or what does the provision of KAMA or NCCG have about a board independence. Please, we like that you nominate a representative from your organizations to participate in this training. Then we have SCGN and UDC, that's a section of Pan-Atlantic University. We have a collaboration, and this collaboration is an hand-holding program for small and medium enterprise, majorly to initiate, so to speak, them into corporate governance. And when I said hand-holding, The structure is that there's going to be a 3-month training, and after that there will be a year handholding where we'll be having helping those SMEs to set up their corporate governance structure. This program is scheduled to kick off next month, and the slot is very limited. We plan to have a cohort of 20 persons, and a lot of interest have been indicated. So if you are interested or you have someone that you would like to nominate for this training, please reach out to us. We have limited slots for this. Before I round off, there is a very special, every one of us, we are very special, but I am duty bound to acknowledge one of the very important personalities in our midst, person of Mr. Oscar Onyema, the group MD, the group CEO of NGX Group, Mr. Oscar Onyema Owen. We appreciate your presence and for joining us for this breakfast event. Thank you so much. In closing, we would like that you connect with us on our social media handles. Our Facebook is called Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. Our Instagram handle is at SCGN, while our website is upgovnigeria.org. And you can interact with our YouTube channel to view some of our past events, which is Society for Corporate Governance Nigeria. We appreciate every one of us for being part of this event, and really thank you for your time. Thank you. We are very sorry we're a bit behind the schedule. We love that you join us some other time. But before we leave, we'll just implore that every one of us will want a video so that we take a group photograph before we leave. Thank you so much. We appreciate you for joining us. Thank you. Let's on our video now. Thank you. Can you take it now? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Until next time, take care. Bye.